everyone, it's Jennifer from Fiberflux. Welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here because today we're going to be making this Cozy Cabin Crochet Shawl. This is a gorgeous shawl, triangle shaped. We're going to work from the bottom up. It's full of texture, it's a beautiful palette, and I know you're going to love it. Now, like I mentioned before, this is a triangle shawl, so we're going to work from the bottom point, work our way upward. And this is a variety of puff stitches and V stitches, so it has a great texture and it's in a nice soothing palette that I thought would be perfect for both fall and winter. Some soft blues, greens, grays, and I'm going to show you how to do each of the stitches involved and how to switch colors and everything in between. So before we start, there's lots of ways to get this pattern. You can get it today. We're going to stitch it up together, step by step. You can also get it over at the Fiberflux blog, the full written pattern for free. You can get the ad-free PDF patterns over in my Ravelry shop and my Etsy shop. And then you can also join the Fiberflux Gold Pattern Club over at Patreon. That's a little community over there. And I do the month's patterns at a time for the community over there. It's a fun place to hang out. So definitely check that out too. So we're going to start with the supplies and then move right into the crochet. Before we get started, be sure and hit that subscribe button to get all the latest Fiberflux video updates. It helps the channel so much and I really appreciate it. So if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any Fiberflux updates. So let's get started. Okay, let's look at this up close. So we have the basic shape is a triangle shawl. So we're going to start here at the bottom and work upward and outward, and it'll grow in width and height as we go up. Now we have some measurements here. So if we take the bottom point and draw an invisible line straight up the middle to the top is about 32 inches. If we go to the bottom point here and go straight out of one of the sides, that is about 40 inches. And then if we measure across the top edge of our triangle, the longest part is about 54 inches, okay? Now, you can just keep repeating more or less rows to get the width taller, or the width wider and the height taller if you want to. And likewise, you can work less rows if you just want like a mini shawlette or something like that. So what we're going to do is start by working from the bottom, work upward and outward, and then I went until I ran out of yarn. So I have here, I worked 4 rows of blue, 1 row of gray, 4 rows of green, and then I repeated. Okay, so that's the color sequence that we're going to do too. Obviously, you can do any color sequence you like and striping you want. You can use self-striping yarns as well. So let's move on to the supplies next. For this project, you'll need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle. A tape measure is super helpful, especially if you want to change the dimensions of your shawl up a little bit. We're going to be using a 5.5 millimeter eye crochet hook. And for our yarn, we have here some beautiful yarn. I've actually been sharing sneak peeks of this over on social media, mostly on Instagram. This is called Upcycled Alpaca Blend from Hobie. It's made of 100% upcycled materials. It's soft. It comes in beautiful colors. I chose some earth tone colors here. But this is, I'm going to tell you about the colors. We're going to use 5 balls of this. So that's a total of 1,090 yards. And that is a number 4 medium weight on the yarn weight scale. So if you need to substitute yarn or you're looking for something similar, look for 1,090 yards of a medium 4 on the yarn weight scale. Now, our upcycled alpaca blend that we have here, I have 5 balls of this. I have 2 balls of this beautiful green color. This is called, this is number color 18. It's called Lichen on the website, and I'll put the links below to shop. This is color 15. I have 2 balls of this. This is called Deep Blue. And then I have 1 ball, just kind of for an accent color, of color number 16, and that's called Gravel. It's like a nice medium gray. This is like a deep kind of denim blue, I would call it. And then this is like a kind of like a mossy green. So just some really beautiful, soothing colors, soft, just a nice feel-good shawl is what we're going to be making today. So grab one of your colors and we're going to start with our repeat. It's very simple and you'll have it memorized in no time. So let's get started. Now, like I mentioned before, the yarn and the hook and all the tools that I talked about today can be found down below in the shop here area. And that's like a whole shopping page where you can find everything and tons more if you need it for your project. So I'm just going to grab some yarn. Now let's talk about the multiples of our shawl. Our shawl is going to be V-shaped with sort of not a super pointy bottom. It has a little bit of a rounded bottom. Okay, so our multiple is going to be 6 plus 6. So if you're not familiar with the concept of multiples, all that means is for your starting chain, you're going to go 6 plus 6 plus 6 and so forth until you get the width that you need. Now, in our case, the width of the bottom of our triangle, because it's going to grow outward and upward. But anyway, 6 plus 6 plus 6 and so forth until you get the size chain that you want, and then add 6 more onto that. Okay, so a multiple of 6 plus 6. So for our shawl, we're going to do a chain 18. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom way in so you can see our stitch work up close. Okay. So what we need to do is put a slip knot on our hook to begin. We have our eye hook, our yarn. So wrap the yarn around your fingers to make a loop, bring the yarn behind that loop, reach in with your hook, bring up that loop and tighten. Next, like I said, we're going to do a chain 18. So to make a chain, wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the loop. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Okay, so our starting chain isn't very big because we're going to be, like I said, growing it outward and upward. Okay, so here's our starting chain. Next, we're going to move on to row 1. Okay, so for row 1, we're going to work into the third chain from the hook. So this loop here doesn't count. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. So in that third chain from the hook, we're going to work a double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. To make a double crochet, wrap the yarn around the hook, insert the hook into that chain that we talked about, and bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the last 2 loops, and that's our double crochet if you've never done one before. Then we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and then in the same chain, we're going to work a double crochet. So work a double crochet in that same chain, okay? Now we're going to be alternating between this V that we just made and puff stitches. So we're going to go V, puff, all the way across, okay? So next we'll skip 2 chains, and in the next chain we'll work our puff stitch. If you've never done a puff stitch, totally fine, we're going to do it together. Wrap the yarn around the hook, insert it into that chain that we talked about, and bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, reinsert it back into that same chain and bring up a loop. You're going to have 5 loops on the hook this time. Wrap yarn around hook, reinsert it back into the same chain one last time and bring up a loop. 7 loops are on the hook. Now what I like to do is kind of grab the bottoms of these loops and just kind of give it a wiggle, straighten everything out, loosen things up a bit. And now wrap the yarn around the hook, bring it through all 7 loops. You might need to give it a wiggle. There we go. And then we're going to chain 1 and then chain 2. So 2 chains. Okay, now we're ready to work a V-stitch again. So we're going to skip 2 chains, and in the chain after that, work a double crochet, chain 2, and a double crochet, all in that same chain, okay? All right, so we just did a V, now we're ready to do a puff, because remember we're alternating. So skip 2 chains, and in the chain after that, we're going to work a puff stitch. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it into that chain and bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it into the same chain, bring up a loop. 5 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it into the same chain once more, bring up a loop. 7 loops are on the hook. Give it a nice wiggle, loosen things up, straighten things out. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops on your hook, and then work 2 chains, okay? All right, so we just did a puff stitch, now we're ready to work a V-stitch. Skip 2 chains, in the chain after that, double crochet, chain 2, 1, 2, and a double crochet. Okay? Now we're going to skip 2 chains, and in that last chain, we're going to work a puff stitch, okay? So remember how to do that. Wrap yarn around hook, bring up a loop, 3 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, insert the hook, bring up a loop, 5 loops are on the hook. One last time, bring up a loop, 7 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops. Okay, and then this time we're just going to work a chain 1 to finish the row. Okay, so it doesn't look like a whole lot right now, but we are creating some building blocks here. Okay, let's move on to row 2. For row 2, what we're going to do is chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and turn our work. Okay, so from here on out, what we're going to be doing is working, this is just a good rule of thumb, just work the opposite of what's below it, okay? So see, we have a puff stitch down here. So this first row, we're going to start by working a V-stitch into that puff that came before it. The next, we're going to hop over to the V-stitch next and work and puff into that and so forth, okay? So what we want to do is go down to the bottom of that chain we just made, into that chain 1. Remember that chain 1 that we finished the row with? And we're going to work a V-stitch into that, okay? So right into that, you can see there's like a little loop at the top of your puff stitch. So right into that, work a double crochet, chain 2, and a double crochet. Okay, just like that. Hop over to your V-stitch, and we're going to work a puff stitch. So wrap yarn around hook, bring up a loop, 3 loops are on the hook, wrap yarn around hook, bring up a loop, 5 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring up a loop one more time. We have 7 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops and chain 2, okay? Hop over to that next puff stitch, and at the top, you'll see that loop, that stitch at the top there. What we're gonna do is work a V-stitch in that. So double crochet, chain 2, double crochet in that same stitch. Okay, so as you can see, we're just building on the opposite thing that happened before it, okay? So that's really easy to remember. All right, so hop over to the next, and we have a V-stitch here. So we'll work a puff into that, okay? So 3 loops, we're gonna go a little bit faster now. 5 loops, 7 loops, yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain 2. Hop over to the next, and it's a puff stitch. So we'll work our V-stitch into that. So double crochet, chain 2, whoops, and double crochet, all in that same stitch. And then we're at the end of the row here. So we're gonna work, we have a V-stitch, so we need to work a puff into that. So 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, bring it through all 7 loops and chain 2. Now, a little bit different on this row, we now have a turning chain. Remember at the end of the last row, we did a turning chain. We did a chain 3 and turned our work. So that created a space. So in the turning chain space, we're also going to work a stitch. So that would be, because we just worked a puff, that would be a V-stitch, okay? So go right into that turning chain space and work your double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, just like that. Okay, and row 2 is complete. So you can kind of see how it's starting to be, it's starting to slant outward, and we're going to continue, okay? So for row 3 is pretty much identical to the previous row, but because we have a different stitch to start on, we're going to start with a different stitch, okay? So chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and turn, same thing we did before. Now this time we have a V-stitch at the beginning of the row instead of a puff. So that's the only difference. So because we worked a V here, we're going to work a puff into that, okay? So once again, 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain 2. Hop over to the next stitch, which is a puff stitch. We're going to work a V-stitch into that puff stitch, okay? So double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. Now we're going to hop over, and it happens to be a V-stitch. So we need to work a puff into that V-stitch, okay? So remember, 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain. Whoops, my yarn split a little. Let me just fix that. There we go. And chain 2. 1, 2. Hop over to the next stitch, and that's a puff stitch. So we'll work a V into that. So right at the top of that puff is a little stitch. We're going to work a double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. Okay? Starting to get a nice shape to it. Hop over to the next, and it's a V stitch. So we know we need to work a puff. So 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops and chain 2. Hop over to the next stitch, it's a puff stitch. So we'll work our V into that, right at the top of that stitch there. Double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, and so forth. So row 2 and 3 are very, very similar. It's just, you just start them differently, okay? All right, we're at a V at the end of the row, so we're gonna work a puff into that. So 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops and chain 2. And then remember, we have our turning chain at the end. So you might have to sometimes have to separate it a little bit. So that turning chain space, we're gonna work our last stitch. We just worked a puff, so we know that we need to work a V stitch. So double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, just like that, okay? So what you're gonna do, and this is starting to get some nice kind of curvature to it, it's laying down real nice and it's starting to open up. So what we're gonna do for the remainder of our project is to keep repeating rows 2 and 3 over and over. And remember I said how rows 2 and 3 are almost identical? You're just repeating rows 2 and 3 because they just start differently. Because on one row you start with a puff, and on the other row you start with a V. But just keep in mind, no matter what row you're on, just look and see what you did before, and you'll do the opposite into that. If you just keep that rule of thumb in mind, then it's super easy. You don't really have to memorize a whole lot. So we're going to keep going. We're going to work a few more rows of the blue, and then I'm going to show you how to switch colors next. Okay, I worked another row or so, and we're just coming up to the end of the row here because I want to show you just how I switch colors. Now there's lots of ways to switch colors, and remember we're just going to do 1 chain at the end of that row when you end on a puff, okay? Any of these details, if you want to refer back to the blog, the full written free pattern is on the blog. Like I was saying, there's lots of ways to switch colors. I like to just cut the yarn, tie the new color on. If you have a way that you prefer to do it, please feel free to do that. There's lots of different ways to do it. Okay, so let's, I'm gonna do a little bit of gray in between each color because I have more green and blue. So I'm gonna put just a nice little stripe of gray when I go to switch colors. So what we're gonna do is, all I do is cut the yarn and then just fasten off. So wrap the yarn around the hook and just pull that through. Okay, so insert the hook into that last stitch that you worked, grab your new yarn and just hook it right on. Leave yourself a little tail. For more open stitches like the one that we're creating here, I like to weave my ends in later. You can, for denser stitches in your projects, you can kind of hold the tail along the edges you work. But for this one, it might show a little bit. I like to have a little bit more control with my ends when I'm weaving them. So I like to do that later. So we're just going to get these tails out of the way. Go back in with your hook into that same stitch. And all you're going to do is bring up a loop. Okay, and then you're ready to go. So remember, we did a chain 3. We're just repeating rows now. Turn your work, and we had a puff here at the end. So we're just going to work a V stitch right into that same stitch here. And you can just keep on going, okay? And so that next V stitch that we come to, we would work a puff into that, and so forth. So we've already gone through all this part, but you can really see those stitches start to really pop out when you start changing colors. It's a nice contrast. So For the rest of your shawl, you're just going to be repeating rows 2 and 3, 2 and 3 over and over and over again until your shawl is as wide and as tall as you would like it to be. I'm going to work some more rows and then we'll kind of reconvene and I'll show you what I did. I'm going to show you the color changes and the number of rows and we'll talk about all of that stuff next. So keep repeating rows 2 and 3, 2 and 3 over and over and over again until your shawl is as large as you would like it to be. I'm going to kind of just keep going until I run out of yarn, and then when we rejoin I'll give you some dimensions and how many rows I worked of each color and things like that, and we'll do the finished work at that time. So keep going with rows 2 and 3 and we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, we've come up to the end of the row for our very last repeat here. Just working that last stitch of the row. And our piece is done. So I just basically kept working rows until I ran out of the yarn, okay? Towards the beginning of the video, I talked a little bit about sizing, and the full sizing measurements of the one I'm showing here are also at the blog, okay? So the links are down below for that. So as you can see, we have some absolutely gorgeous texture. And just to review, I did 4 rows of green, 4 rows of blue, and then I did just a single row of gray in between each color repeat. So it looks very pretty. It's a very soft feeling and the colors are very wearable. So let's just do some finished work and then we're going to be finished with our beautiful shawl. So I'm just going to cut the yarn. I didn't have enough to begin anymore. I just have like this tiny little handful of yarn here. So I'm just going to wrap the yarn around the hook and fasten that off. Just tighten it down. And then if you did lots of colors like me, if you didn't use the self-striping, I did my stripes on my own myself without self-striping yarn. So I have lots and lots of ends. We're going to do 1 or 2 together just to show you in case you're not familiar with this. But what you're going to do is grab any end you want to start with, grab your needle, thread your needle, and I happen to have a green one here. We're going to do the green into the green. So try not to go into this gray or the blue or whatever because it will stand out, okay? You'll have this like green line traveling through your work, okay? So I'm just going to go in between these stitches here. And this is a reversible shawl, so you want to just make sure your work's nice and neat on both sides. All right, I'm going to go in one direction with my needle and then come back in the other direction with my needle. And then just give it a little snip. And then we're just going to repeat this for all the ends, any ends that you have on your piece. So the next one is this gray. And I just want to make sure that I stay in the gray parts here. So just go in this gray area, just stay in between just the gray stitches of your piece, okay? And then you'll just repeat for all the other tails of your shawl. So I'm going to go ahead and weave these ends in, and then when we return, we'll rejoin and look at our beautiful finished shawl. Okay, all the ends have been woven in, it looks beautiful, and it's ready to wear. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and that is how you make the Cozy Cabin Crochet Shawl. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiberflux video updates. Thanks again!